What is up, guys, and welcome back to yet another Intel Arc A580 benchmark. Now in today's video we are going to be doing an investigation that was pointed out, or rather we're going to be investigating an issue that was pointed out by Hardware Canucks, later on confirmed and rather tested by Hardware Unboxed. And the issue that I'm talking about is the CPU overhead issue with the Intel Arc A580, in that the GPU does not perform well with older high-end CPUs and just older mid-range CPUs. Personally, between using the 8700G and the 8400F, I did not see a difference. So in today's video, I'm going to be putting the Intel Arc A580 through some rigorous testing with those four CPUs. So the 8400F, the 8700G, both of these CPUs are using DDR5, and the 5700X and the Ryzen 5500, both of these two CPUs are using DDR4. So I'm going to investigate this CPU overhead issue and confirm to you whether it's something you should think of when it comes to purchasing an Intel Arc A580. So forgive my mistake at the beginning of the video there, as I was not using the Ryzen 5500, rather I was using the Ryzen 5 5600G. So that was just a minor mistake that I made while filming the video. But the first CPU that I decided to test the Intel Arc B580 with is the Ryzen 7 8700G, and I was running 16 gigs of DDR5 RAM, and I was running these games at a resolution of 1440p. So first up, we decided to test Forza Horizon 5, where I was averaging an average FPS of 100, and ray tracing was also turned on and set to high. Need for Speed Unbound, on the other hand, was averaging 55 FPS with high settings. Resident Evil 4, the remake, was averaging 62 FPS with high settings. Cyberpunk 2077 was averaging 60 FPS with high settings, and finally Marvel's Spider-Man 2 was averaging 60 FPS with high settings, and Intel XeSS dynamic resolution scaling was turned on. Switching things up to the Ryzen 5 8400F with the same configuration of 16 gigs of DDR5 RAM and running the games at 1440p. With Forza Horizon 5 at high settings, I was averaging an average FPS of 100 FPS. Need for Speed Unbound was averaging 55 FPS with high settings. Resident Evil 4, the remake, was averaging an average of 62 FPS with high settings. Cyberpunk 2077 was averaging 60 FPS with high settings, and Marvel's Spider-Man 2 was also getting 60 FPS with high settings, and again Intel XeSS dynamic resolution scaling was turned on. It's pretty interesting to see that the 8700G, which is an 8-core 16-thread CPU, was kinda getting the same performance with the 8400F, which is a 6-core 12-thread CPU. So that's pretty interesting. But if we drop down to DDR4, where we are going to be switching things up to using the Ryzen 7 5700X3D paired up with 16 gigs of DDR4 RAM, and I was also still running the games at 1440p. Here, Forza Horizon 5 was averaging an average FPS of 98, and Need for Speed Unbound was averaging 50 FPS with high settings. And by the way, Forza Horizon was also running on high settings. Resident Evil 4 on high settings was actually getting a high FPS compared to their DDR5 counterparts. I think it's because of the X3D cache, but I was averaging an average FPS of 65 FPS with high settings. Cyberpunk 2077 was averaging 60 FPS on high settings. Now dropping down to the 6-core 12-thread 5600G with the same configuration of 16 gigs of DDR4 RAM. Running the game at 1440p, Forza Horizon 5 was averaging an average FPS of 98. Need for Speed was averaging an average FPS of 42 with high settings, and Resident Evil 4, the remake, did drop down to 62. So I'm sure you've noticed that Need for Speed Unbound and Resident Evil 4 have dropped in FPS. So yeah, Cyberpunk 2077 did drop down, and its performance was significantly impacted, as I was only averaging 50 FPS with high settings. Now for Marvel Spider-Man 2, this is where the game really suffered, dropping down to a 6-core 12-thread DDR4 CPU, in that I was averaging an average FPS of 40 with Intel XeSS dynamic resolution scaling. Okay, so with these results in mind, it is safe to conclude that the Intel Arc B580 does indeed have a CPU overhead issue. Now, my overall recommendations when it comes to using the Intel Arc B580 is to stick with DDR5 configurations. As you did see with the 8700G and the 8400F, there was no loss in FPS. And if you have to use the Intel Arc with the DDR4 systems, then my recommendation is to use the newer X3D processors and probably 8-core 16-thread CPUs from this particular generation of CPUs. So you did see with the 5700 X3D that my performance hit wasn't as significant as compared to using the 6-core 12-thread 5600G. Now, the Intel Arc B580 is quite a decent GPU, and I'm pretty sure that Intel, as we speak, probably is working and investigating the CPU overhead issue, and probably in the near future you will find that the CPU overhead issue will be resolved. It is a nice GPU, and I just love the fact that Intel is a new player in the space and they're giving us more options, and we don't have to choose between AMD and Nvidia, but we also have Intel GPU as well. Now tell us what you think about this video, and I'll be sure to catch you in the next one.